This is Math 6, Lesson 7-1, Ratios. A ratio is a comparison of two quantities by division. We could say something like 5 boys to 7 girls. That's a ratio. They're two quantities, and we can show them by division by saying 5 to 7. Equivalent ratios are two ratios that name the same number. For example, 5 to 7 is the same thing as saying 10 to 14 because 5 times 2 is 10 and 7 times 2 is 14. Ratios can be written three ways. They can be written as a fraction, 5 to 7. They can be written with the word 2, 5 to 7. Or they can be written with a colon, 5:7. Doesn't matter how you write them, they are all said the same way. 5 to 7, 5 to 7, and 5 to 7. Ratios are always written in lowest terms, but they are never converted to a mixed number. For example, if I wanted to compare the number of girls to the number of boys, it would be 7 to 5. We would never say 1 2/5 because we can't have 2/5 of a person. Yes, there's 1 2/5 girls to every boy. There's one whole girl, and from their head to the middle of their waist. I don't think so. Okay, so you never convert a ratio to a mixed number. You leave it as an improper fraction. We're going to practice writing some ratios. It says, during a school trip, there are 3 teachers and 25 students on each bus. Write each ratio in 3 ways. So we're going to write the ratio of teachers to students. Well, if there are 3 teachers and 25 students, that ratio is 3/25. And we can write it as a fraction. We can write it with the word 2. And we can write it with the colon. We do not need to reduce this ratio because it is already in reduced form. There is no number that divides evenly into both 3 and 25. Now we can write the ratio of students to teachers. There are 25 students and 3 teachers, which means 25 to 3. Written as a fraction, written with the word 2, and written with a colon. And remember, we leave it as an improper fraction if we write it in fractional form. And then we have students to total. Well, if there are 3 teachers and 25 students, that's a total of 28 people. So the number of students is 25, the number of people is 28. So it's 25 to 28, 25 to 28, or 25:28. Always read 25 to 28. 2 ratios that name the same number are called equivalent ratios, just like equivalent fractions. You can find equivalent ratios by multiplying or dividing each term of a ratio by the same non-zero number. So let's practice writing some equivalent ratios. Write 2 different ratios equivalent to 24 to 8. Well, 24 to 8, 24 is the same thing as saying 24 divided by 8. And 24 divided by 8, we can reduce this. It is divisible by 3. Excuse me, it's divisible by 8. I can divide 24 by 8. I can divide 8 by 8. And that will give me 3/1. So the equivalent ratio, one equivalent ratio is 3 to 1. If I take 3 to 1 and I multiply 3 times 2 and 1 times 2, that will give me 6 to 2, which is another equivalent ratio. I could take my original ratio of 24 to 8, and I could multiply that by 2. And I could get 48/16. All of these are equivalent ratios. 3 to 1, 6 to 2, 48/16. And it doesn't matter which way you write them. Just because the original problem was in a colon, used the colon form, you don't need to keep it in the colon form. You only need to write it the way that they ask you to write it. If they specifically state you must write it in a specific way. Just as with fractions, you can write ratios in simplest form. To do this, you can divide the terms of the ratio by their greatest common factor, or GCF. Let's write each one of these ratios in simplest form. 121 to 11. So 121 to 11. I see that and I know, greatest common factor is 11. So I'm going to divide this by 11 and divide this by 11. 121 divided by 11 is 11, and 11 divided by 11 is 1. So this is 11 to 1. With a ratio, you must keep the 1. You can't just say that the ratio is 11, because a ratio is defined as the comparison of two quantities by division, so you have to have two quantities to compare. So we have to keep the 1 in this particular ratio. 28 to 16, I'm looking at this going 28 over 16. I know that's divisible by 4. So I'm going to take out the greatest common factor of 4. 28 divided by 4 is 7. 16 divided by 4 is 4. So in the lowest terms, this ratio is 7 to 4. 3 to 24. 3 to 24. The greatest common factor here is 3. So if I divide 3 by 3, I get 1. If I divide 24 by 3, I get 8. So the lowest ratio form here is 1 to 8. Ratios are very much like fractions with just a few different parts to them. For example, you have to keep a whole number over 1 in order to keep it as a ratio. We'll be doing a lot of things with ratios in this chapter.